Good morning. I'd like you to pick up your beautiful card, made by the Mobius Beauty team, who should be called the Mobius Beauty and Depth team, and just have a little read. Not only does inflammation cause disease, our biology perceives it as a threat to survival, making us want to grab any resources we have in sight. We become impulsive, unable to delay gratification. The fallout: unbridled consumerism, a desire for unmitigated growth at all costs in business, political short-sightedness, addiction of all kinds, as well as an inability to break old habitual patterns and systems. Now that's a stand. And I'm so proud that we have the person who wrote those words with us this morning. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Mobius Senior Expert, Dr. Parneet Pal. Parneet is a Harvard and Columbia trained physician-educator and a true pioneer in demonstrating the connection between our individual health, planetary well-being, and sustainability. As she will demonstrate and has demonstrated, these are inseparable. She's the founder of Systematically Well Advisory, where she works with business teams and global organizations to address leadership, performance, workplace stress, burnout, loneliness, well-being, and sustainability, all the things that we come across all the time. She uses evidence-based strategies from lifestyle medicine, neuroscience, behavioral science, and psychology. Previously, she designed preventive well-being programs for executive health, including at the University of California, San Francisco, where my son was born, by the way, aside. She led the faculty curriculum and content development as the chief science officer of a health startup, scaling corporate mental well-being. She speaks globally on all these topics, all over the place, as a Harvard Business Review contributor, and has featured on the cover of Mindful magazine. A systems thinker, she translates complex science into easily understood and actionable insights for long-lasting behavior change, which we are all super interested in. Her goal is to make you fall in love with your biology. Everybody in love with their biology here? You will be. So that it works for you, your work, and the planet. Parneet was the first generation of her family in Mumbai, India, to go to college. She entered medical school at 17, and she worked her way up to a medical residency in physical medicine, and probably meditation, and rehabilitation at Harvard Medical School, following an internship in internal medicine at Columbia, and a master's degree in exercise and movement science at the University of Oregon. She champions the interdependence within human and planetary systems that make them resilient and regenerative, and we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you, Parneet.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for that very warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's such a lovely, warm, fuzzy crowd. I like it. So we're going to start with a quick reflection. So I'm going to ask you to please sit up straight, make sure your legs are not crossed, and close your eyes. And as you do that, I want you to notice what comes up for you when I say the words health and well-being. So again, there are no right or wrong answers. Just notice what comes up for you: health and well-being. Next, I want you to tune into your body, and I want you to find the boundaries of your body. So what are those outer limits of your body? And then let's move a little bit deeper into the body. So I want you to find your heartbeat. Really feel your heart beating. And if you'd like, you can put one or both hands on your heart to do that. And as you tune into your heartbeat, know that your heart beats 100,000 times every day. It pumps 5.6 liters of blood 3 times per minute through your body. That's traversing a distance of 19,000 kilometers every single day. And it does this so that it can bring blood, oxygen, nutrients to the 30 trillion cells that make up your body. So I want you to visualize those 30 trillion cells that are keeping you alive, because they themselves are alive. In fact, there's an electric charge across the cell membranes of each of those cells. And if you were to blow those cells up to human size, the strength of that charge would be the same as a lightning bolt. You are electric. And the food that you eat every single day gets broken down in these cells to release energy. And that takes 1 billion metabolic reactions every second in your body to produce that energy. And it's that energy that determines how you feel right now in this moment. So however you're feeling, the level of energy that you have, the level of focus that you have, how creative you're feeling, your ability to think, emote, relate, love, all the impact in the world that you have depends on that energy. And the best part is all of this is happening without you having to do a single thing about it. Your body is working unconsciously, beautifully on your behalf. So I'd like you to just thank your body for everything that it does for you. And with that sense of gratitude, let's go ahead and open our eyes and come back into the room. All right. So as Kirsten mentioned, in all of my work, I take a systems view on health. And today, and as I do in every single organization that I work with, I have 2 primary goals. The first is to, yes, make you fall in love with your biology. And in order to do that, I want to give you a very different story of what health means. Health is not something that happens in the doctor's office. It's not a silo. It's not confined to the limits of your body. Health, as we're going to see today, is this dynamic conversation between our inner and our outer ecologies. And this is really important to keep in mind, and this is sort of the second takeaway that I want to give through this talk, is that when it comes to leadership, when it comes to organizations of any kind, our biology is foundational for our moment-to-moment decision-making. So those are the 2 things that I hope we can get to today. What we find right now, in 2025, is that we are at a very interesting, we're facing a very interesting predicament. So we face this kind of internal energy crisis, right? So rates of stress, burnout, loneliness, anxiety, depression are at an all-time high across the globe. So we have this internal energy crisis. But at the same time, when we look externally, our planet is really, really suffering. How many of you are familiar with the planetary boundaries framework? A few of you. So think of planetary boundaries as sort of like the safe outer limit beyond which our planet cannot sustain life. And just like when you go to the doctor's office and you get your lab test done and you have a set of parameters that keep you healthy, there are 7 planetary boundaries. Think of them like the blood panel for the planet. That green space that you see in here, that is a safe operating zone. So that's where we need to be. So when you read your lab test, that's like the normal range. But as you can see, we have exceeded 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. So everything that you see in the dark orange there, that is where the planet is sick, where it's out of range. And these include, I don't know how much you can read from the back, but it includes things like climate change, it includes things like biodiversity, it includes the integrity of the land and water and biogeochemical flows, that's the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles in the atmosphere. It includes ocean acidification, so our oceans were healthy up until literally 2 weeks ago, where we just exceeded that boundary as well. So our planet is very, very sick. If this was a patient in the hospital, they would be in intensive care. So it's really interesting to note that we are facing this external and internal energy crisis, and this is not a coincidence. And when we sort of dig deep into what, the conversation, especially around climate change and sustainability, we focus a lot on the technology and the external resources, which of course is important. But when we get down to it, at the root of this planetary crisis is a human behavioral crisis. And what I'm going to argue for is that that is actually biological. And what we find, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with headlines like this. This is taken from a couple of years ago when there were wildfires raging globally, and yet there were some companies that were making horrendous amounts of money off of what was happening to the planet. So these are the fossil fuel companies. And I'm just going to read this quote because I think it's really, really important for us to keep in mind. Every house burned to the ground, every town forced to evacuate, every ecosystem lost to a wildfire is a necessary consequence of a business model like Shell's, which prioritizes short-term cash grabs. I want you to remember this phrase, short-term cash grabs over the safety and survivability of our societies. And this is what I describe a metabolic decline of humanity. So what does that mean? So clearly, our planet is on fire, but so is our body. So just as carbon dioxide levels have been increasing externally, cellular inflammation levels in our body have also been increasing. So they're at an all-time high. So what is cellular inflammation? Well, when we eat food, it gets broken down in our cells to produce energy, and that energy is used to remove all the waste from the body, but then that energy is also used for our body to grow. So all of these processes together is called metabolism, and so metabolism is the engine in our cells that keeps us alive. And when we live the kinds of lifestyle that we are living right now, so sort of the Western lifestyles, our diets, so the levels of stress that we encounter in our everyday lives, what we're noticing is that breaks down metabolism. So metabolism goes awry in our cells, and that leads to a rise in inflammation. And inflammation is just simply the body's immune response to any kind of stress, so whether it's physical stress, an external injury, an infection, or any kind of mental or social stress. And inflammation is good. We need inflammation to heal the body in the face of injury, but we get into trouble when that inflammation becomes really, really chronic, which is what we're noticing. So when we have chronic inflammation, that becomes a starting point for all the chronic diseases that you and I worry about for ourselves, our families, our work teams. So there's things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and obesity and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, mental health disorders like anxiety and depression. In fact, 3 out of 4 of us today in this room and globally will suffer from one of these chronic diseases in our lifetimes. And in fact, that's what you're seeing in this chart there is the cause of death. Everything, in the first sort of, everything that you see in the blue is a kind of chronic disease. And at work, again, I think this is something that all of you probably encounter every single day in your work as well, is that levels of burnout we are seeing. This is the 2024 State of Workplace Burnout Report, which was sort of a global window into the levels of stress. And from 2020 up until last year, rates of burnout have just been increasing from 30% to 38%. It's probably even higher when we'll take a look at the report next year. And What's also interesting is that there's a discrepancy between how leadership and executives at companies perceive the health of their employees. So on surveys, employees generally report that their health is deteriorating, whereas executives, when they are asked, how do you think your teams are doing, they seem to think that their employees are doing well or better than they were before. So really interesting to see that discrepancy. So what can we do about this, and how is this kind of inflammation affecting, how does it spread from an individual to workplace and societal level? So there's some really great research, brand new research that was done in this space. And I'm just going to play you a 15-second video, which will sort of give you an insight into what's going on in our bodies. So for those of you who want to look up that study, this is it. It's in the Frontiers in Science. It's openly available, and it gives you a really good understanding. They've basically mapped out this inflammation map globally so that we can track how this individual stress then spreads everywhere else. So this is perhaps one of the most important takeaways that I want you to get from this talk is this slide. Why our biology matters for leadership. And this is because when our cells are inflamed, so when metabolism breaks down and our cellular inflammation goes up, the body perceives this as a threat to its survival. So when it does that, it makes us want to, in that moment, we develop sort of like this tunnel-visioned outlook on life. It's all about, we become self-focused. It's all about protecting me in this moment. And it makes us want to grab and hoard onto whatever resources we might have in that moment. It also makes us really impulsive. It's really hard for us to delay gratification in that moment. And we resort to, because in that moment of survival, your biology wants to conserve energy. So this is not the time to rely on some elaborate creative ideas. It will rely on our old conditioned patterns of thinking and behaving. And so that's what we tend to resort to in that moment. And as you can imagine, in this tunnel vision, self-focused state, trust and empathy for those around us really, really crumbles. And so when we think about this is basically a recipe for short-termism. And this is essentially what we're noticing in every single facet of our lives, right? So when it comes to our own health and well-being, what do? I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'll eat better tomorrow. I'll exercise tomorrow, right? So it affects our individual choices. As businesses, we're seeing this, the kinds of product that we design. AI, anyone? So we sort of resort to what's good for the next quarter, instead of thinking about the long term. And then, of course, politically, I don't need to say much here in this audience. I'm Canadian. But yay. But we get so we're kind of seeing the fallout, and it's becoming really, really hard. Jokes aside, it's just becoming hard for us on every single level with this kind of information. So Antonio Damasio is a fantastic evolutionary neuroscientist, and I love what he says here. He says, all living creatures and their behaviors have been optimized specifically for energy efficiency. Cellular functions, behaviors, and the mind, I'll say that again, cellular functions, behaviors, and the mind are secondary to energy flow. And so it's very important for us to remember that, yes, we need the outer technology, we need the outer solutions. We have to do the deep emotional, psychological work, but we must remember that in a moment of crisis, and we live in an age of polycrisis, in a moment of crisis, our behaviors don't rise to the level of our psychology. They fall to the level and quality of our cellular energy. In other words, we can't outrun our biology. And I think this is really, really important for us to keep in mind in all the work that you do, that unless you have that foundation of biological well-being, it's very hard to follow through and sustain all the other changes that we are trying to make in our lives. And when it comes to leadership, then, this is how it impacts that moment-to-moment decision-making. So what you're seeing on the left here, this is, of course, our habit loop. Everybody familiar with the habit loop? Yes? Yeah, so, you have a trigger. So I feel stressed. Then there's your habitual behavior. I eat cookie. And behavior, you get a reward. Cookie makes me feel good. So the next time I feel stressed, I'm more likely to reach for that cookie again. And what we know is that most of our behaviors are habitual. Because they are determined by our genetics, they are also determined by our family and life experiences, which again, there's very little that we can go back and change. But the good news, and I'm here to give you the good news, and we will get to the good news, don't worry, is that this cellular energy, if we can change or shift or impact our cellular energy through our lifestyle factors, which we'll get to shortly, this is where we have some leverage. This is an opportunity for change that we can consciously make so that we can then make those better decisions for ourselves, our businesses, and planet. All right, so just a quick check, and don't worry, you don't have to share this, but just in your mind, I'm just, figure out how fuel efficient is your body. So how is your energy flow doing right now? So when you wake up in the morning, do you feel unrefreshed, tired, or sleepy on most days? Are your sleep-wake times inconsistent most days? And again, just kind of do a checklist as I go through these. Do you find that you can't sustain your energy levels? So you have like these midday energy crashes, or maybe you have a lot of food cravings, or you feel like you have to snack very often. How about your moods? Maybe you find that you get irritable or anxious really easily. How many of you have felt hangry? Yes. Okay, or you have like brain fog and you can't really focus in a sustained way. Then I want you to think about if you gain weight really easily and it's really hard to lose that weight. Or do you find that you're sitting most of the time and you hardly even get up and get any movement? And do you find that you need stimulants like tea and coffee to keep you going through the day? And here's the thing. What if after a break of 12 hours, so maybe you slept overnight and 12 hours in a fasted state, if I asked you to then go out and work out for 2 hours, would you be able to do that? Now, if your answers to any of those were like, yes, then it just sort of, it's, again, there's nothing, there's no judgment here. It's just, I just want you to take note of that. And to just know that, okay, that's a signal. I maybe there's room for improvement here. Maybe my energy flow and my efficiency is not where it needs to be. But then also to start thinking about, I wonder how that might be impacting my moment-to-moment decision-making in my life and in my work. Okay, so let's get to, well, how do we shift? If you notice any of those things are happening, how do we shift that? How do we get that energy to improve? So where is this energy coming from? Anyone? Where is this moment-to-moment energy coming from in your cells? Sorry? Your mitochondria. Somebody's been reading up. Yes, exactly. And even more simply than that, it's the food on our plate, right? So I just, this is something that we all know, but it's so beautiful and complex that we often take it for granted. So I just want to mention this again so that we remember it, is that plants take in the sun's light energy and they combine it with carbon dioxide to produce in their cells, right, the carbohydrates, proteins, and the fat. And then we as humans eat those plants, or we eat the animals that eat those plants. And then in our mitochondria, which we'll get to in a second, we burn that fuel, right? So we breathe in the oxygen, and we burn that fuel and breathe out the carbon dioxide, and that's how energy is produced. And that is how we show up day to day. And very importantly, down here, when we die, when plants die, when animals die, we all go back into the soil, right? And that contributes to the biodiversity that's super important for the soil, because guess what? That's where our plants and animals that we then feed on come from. So of course we know this, we're very aware of this, but I just want you to notice this interdependent energy cycle, the fact that your impact as a leader depends on soil biodiversity. It depends on the air that you breathe, the quality of the oxygen, and how much carbon dioxide there is in the air. It makes a huge difference. Okay, so a new word for you. Please learn this word and share it with as many people as you can. It's the exposome. So the human exposome, it refers to all of our life exposures from the moment of conception. So literally when sperm meets ovum, from that moment of conception till the day that you die, this is your exposome. So we all have these exposures that we go through in our everyday life. Now I want you to imagine yourself, even today, right now, what is your exposome in this moment? So your exposome in this moment consists of, first of all, lifestyle. So, right, what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, how we manage our stress, that is our lifestyle. That is one exposure that we have. But then we have many other exposures like our ecosystems. So for example, right now, when you step outside, do you go into a concrete jungle, or are you surrounded by nature, right? So those are our ecosystems. The cities that you live in, right? Like how walkable are those cities? How green are those cities? That is the exposure that you have from those systems. And then your social exposures, right? How much money do you make? What are the kinds of workplaces that you work in? How many friends do you have? So what is your social network and your social capital? And then how much stress do those social exposures put on you on a regular basis? And then, of course, the physical and chemical exposures that we have, and it's a long list, but this includes things like the quality of the air that we breathe. So right now, what is the quality of the air in this room, the ventilation system? Is there plastic and flame retardants and other chemicals in like the paint and the carpets that might be off-gassing something right now? What is the quality of the food on your plate? What pesticides used in the soil that the food was grown in? And of course, microplastics is a huge, huge issue. Microplastics have been found in every single organ in our body. Unfortunately, they've even been found in placenta and newborns. So that is the level of exposure that we have to all of these chemicals. So when we think about this exposome, right? So think of your body, those 30 trillion cells. Every single day, as we are exposed to all of this, your body has a very narrow, safe operating zone. Just like the planet had that green zone in the middle, your body has a very narrow zone of pH and temperature and blood glucose level that it has to maintain. Otherwise, your cells will die. And so in order to maintain that homeostasis, your body has to meet these exposures so that these exposures don't kill you. And who does that for you? Well, I want to introduce you to the superstars for today, which is your mitochondria. I love mitochondria, and if you're familiar with my work, you will know that. So mitochondria are really cool. Mitochondria are these ancient bacteria that were co-opted by multicellular life 1.5 billion years ago. So we actually have these descendants of ancient bacteria in all of our cells. So each cell in your body has a few hundred, sometimes thousands of mitochondria. And these mitochondria do many things. So I'm going to quickly run through a few of the things that they do. They get branded as like the power plants of the cell, but that is actually the least interesting thing that they do, because what we're learning now in medicine and in health is that mitochondria might hold the key to our life and our energy and our well-being. So what you're seeing here, this is just a diagram, but I think it's really instructive to keep in mind. So imagine you have a cell, right? Like a very simple idea. You have a cell, and inside the cell, you have a nucleus. The nucleus has all your DNA, all your genetic material, and then surrounding this nucleus are all your mitochondria, right? So imagine they're all, and I'm actually in the next slide, I'm going to show you real life mitochondria under a slide. Very exciting. So we are, so these mitochondria that surround the nucleus, this is just one, it's just like a figure of a mitochondrion. And the difference in color is the blue part is like a healthy mitochondrion, and the orange part is what happens as the mitochondrion becomes old and ages. So anyway, so the first thing, what do the mitochondria do? Your mitochondria are listening. So even right now, they are listening to the rhythm of your life. They're listening to your exposome. Because why? They have to keep you alive. And in order to do that, as you are exposed to all of these stimuli and triggers and stressors in your life, your mitochondria act as that interface between your inner and outer ecology. And so they take that information in and then send it to the nucleus. And they tell the nucleus, okay, right now, this is the amount of stress that is being put on us, and therefore we need to produce this amount of energy in order to counteract that stress. These are the hormones that need to be produced. This is the repair that needs to be done. And your body runs on proteins, and your proteins are encoded by your genes, right? So your genes turn on and off not randomly, but depending on the requirements. And so what mitochondria do is that they transmit this information to the nucleus, and then the nucleus says, okay, let's turn these set of genes on right now so that these kinds of proteins can be made so that we can then counteract this kind of stress so that we can stay alive. I hope that makes sense. So mitochondria control up to 60% of our genetic output. So this is called the epigenetic control, which is how external factors translate into genetic expression. So that's one of the things that mitochondria do. Of course, mitochondria produce energy, right? So the food that you eat that is broken down, this thing called the TCA cycle, is actually literally the hub of life. That's a whole other story. But the TCA cycle is beautiful. It's one of the most fascinating things in biology, but I digress. Okay, so here, so what happens up here is that food is broken down and energy is released in order to be able to do work. And that's also what maintains that kind of, electric charge that I was mentioning before, both across the membranes of the mitochondrion, but also across the membrane of your cell. Okay, what else? The mitochondria keep track of, they don't do this kind of translation randomly. So they keep track of your circadian rhythm. So right now when the sun is out, that's a signal to the body that this is the time to eat, move, and build. So it will translate that kind of genetic expression. And then when the sun sets, your mitochondria keep track of that, and then they give a different signal to the nucleus to say, hey, now it's a time to rest and sleep. And so different set of gene expression comes online so that you can restore and repair when you sleep at night. The other thing that mitochondria do is that they run the most efficient circular economies in your cells. So when old dead proteins and damaged cell parts, they take that and they recycle it into new forms of energy. And then when cells die, every cell has a finite life. When cells die, they're immediately replaced by new ones. And this is called regeneration from our stem cells. And so your bodies have an excellent capacity for regeneration. Just in this past second, 10,000 of your lymphocytes were just replaced. And your gut lining renews itself every 2 to 3 days. Your body is a wonderland. And then while doing all of these things, your mitochondria are constantly conferring and collaborating with your microbiome. Your microbiome are the 30 trillion. So we have just the same number of cells in the body. We have the same number of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live on and inside our bodies, especially our gut. And your microbiome works together with your mitochondria, not just for digestion, but they're super important for your immunity, for your protection against cancer, for regenerating and repair of your cells, and for your moods and your motivation. They're responsible for the production of so many neurotransmitters like serotonin and acetylcholine and so on. And so how you show up at work and how good you feel depends on that collaboration between your mitochondria and your microbiome. And the strength of your microbiome depends on the diversity. So the more diverse your microbiome is, the better your health. And how do we get a diverse microbiome? By eating a diversity of plant foods. And the strength of those plant foods and the diversity depends upon the quality of the soil that they are grown in. And so I hope you're starting to see this connection that when we start to harm the earth, we are literally harming our own self. All right, so I hope you're all getting excited about your mitochondria. And the fact that, and we have 14 quadrillion mitochondria, because remember there are hundreds to thousands in each cell. So the takeaway here is, in order to stay alive, in order for us to do our best work, we have to keep our mitochondria healthy, because there's a two-way feedback loop. You have the exposome adding the stress, your mitochondria respond, and your mitochondria protect you. But if that breaks down, which is sort of the bottom half of this, as your mitochondria age, but also if this external exposome, if the stressors are way out of line, which is unfortunately what is happening to us in our everyday lives, then there's only so much. Your mitochondria try really hard, but then they start to break down. And when that starts to happen, that's when that inflammation starts to rise in your cell. It becomes chronic, and that's what leads to disease. But very importantly, right now, disease might happen 5, 10, 15 years down the line, but in this moment, it means it's going to put us into that short-term state of mind, and we're going to make really lousy decisions for ourselves, our businesses, and planet. And here we go. So this is alive under a microscope. The green stuff are your mitochondria, and they're moving, and they move and they fuse into one another, they break off from one another, and this black area that they're surrounding is actually the nucleus. This is very few people get to see that. I get excited. I see it so many times, but I really love it. But isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing that these little ancient bacteria are the reason that you are alive? All right, so just to summarize all that, there's so much here, but what I would love for you to take away is that the quantity and quality of your cellular energy depends on the integrity of your mitochondria. Your mitochondria are these masterminds that balance growth versus repair in your cells. And so when we think about how can I do better by my biology so that I can do better by my business, the kind of leader that I am, you need to think about your mitochondrial efficiency and making and replacing more mitochondria as they die, because they have a finite life as well. So that's called mitochondrial biogenesis. And these are all this and many, many of these other systems that come into play are the kinds of things that I talk about in my work within organizations. But I'll give you just a quick 3 practical strategies. Is number 1, and remember, this is what the research shows. So number 1 is deep rest. So deep rest, as you might intuitively think about, yes, sleep, but also contemplative practices, right? So all your mindfulness, compassion practices that you do, as well as the kinds of regulated breathing practices that you might do, all of that helps shift your mitochondria away from that growth. So we tend to over-index on growth, right? Because of all the stressors in the exposome. So what we need to give our mitochondria a break so that they can turn on those genes for repair. So getting in that kind of deep rest helps us to do that. The second strategy is microbial diversity for our microbiome, as we just spoke about. So if you can get as many plant-rich, fiber-rich foods in your diet as possible. The research shows at least 30, that's 30, different plant-based foods every single week. And it's not as daunting as it sounds, because everything counts: grains, legumes, vegetables, herbs, spices, all of that count towards that count of 30. And then the third thing is hormesis. Hormesis refers to a short, finite, intentional stress that we put on our body, which actually helps to change gene expression in a particular way that is good for our longevity, because it turns on DNA repair mechanisms. And so those are things like movement. So exercise, especially things like strength training and high-intensity interval training, are really, really good for this kind of stimulation. Some kinds of fasting, and again, that's a whole other topic. And as women, women's bodies respond very differently to fasting than men. So we just have to be careful what we hear in the podcast world. And then and then things like exposure to heat and cold, like sauna and cold exposure. So those are examples of hormetic stressors that can help to regenerate your mitochondria and improve their efficiency as well. And before we go, just very quickly, just wanted to bring this to life in a different way and just ask all of us to reflect on the work exposome, right? So remember, work, the conditions that we face every day at work are part of those exposures. And burnout is something that we are seeing every organization that I work with. This is a huge issue. Many misconceptions around burnout, but I'll just point out a few things. That burnout is not related to your personal life. It's a very specific definition which is related to workplace stress that's chronic, that hasn't been managed well. For a diagnosis of burnout, you need 3 things to be present at the same time. One, the exhaustion that you feel, not just physical exhaustion, but also sort of emotional exhaustion. There's also a sense of inefficacy, that feeling like I'm doing everything that I can, I'm passionate about my work, but nothing seems to be changing. So that's that sense of professional inefficacy. And then a sense of cynicism or depersonalization, which is basically you just give up. You don't care about your work. You don't care about the people that you work with. And when all 3 are present, that is when burnout is present. And then what we know about the causes of burnout is that it is not an individual failing. There's nothing wrong with the individual. It's a systems issue. It's a work exposome issue. It's a leadership issue. And again, I won't go into the details here, but these are the 6 drivers of burnout that have been studied. Workloads, not being recognized for your effort, not having enough autonomy, not having a sense of belonging, or no psychological safety or fairness, or a values conflict. So the reason I mention this is because when you do your work and when you go out into the world and into the organizations, know that this is contributing to that mitochondrial stress very, very directly. It's the work exposome that is compromising our health and well-being. But of course, when we address that, the results speak for themselves. And I'll just show you this. This study, I don't know if any of you have seen this. It came out a few months ago, but really fantastic, where they followed different organizations over time to take a look at the impact of well-being on very hard stats, the financial statistics that people care about, unfortunately, only. But the more well your organization, the greater the firm value, the greater the profits, the greater the return on assets. In fact, what you see in the blue in that graph there, and it's very hard to see, but there are faint lines at the bottom. It's basically these companies did better than most of these at the S&P 500 and other indices. So really interesting to note. I mean, on some level, it's a bit of a duh. Of course, if you're doing well, your company's going to do well. But what I find fascinating fascinating is that this message gets so easily lost or taken for granted. All right, so to close, the Earth for All report, which I would highly recommend you read, it was a 30-year follow-up to the original 1972 Limits to Growth report put out at MIT. And what the Earth for All report basically found was that right now, we have all the technology and resources that we need to create well-being for all on a stable planet. And the amount of investment that is needed is just 3 to 4% of our global income every year. So I think that's a no-brainer, right? That should be easy to do, just 3 to 4% of global income, and we can create well-being for all on a stable planet. But what the authors of this report said was that, they left us with a provocation. They said, it remains to be seen whether we as a collective humanity will actually follow through with this. And this reminds me of what environmentalist James Beth has famously said, that the biggest environmental problems of our time are not climate change and biodiversity loss. It's human selfishness, apathy, and greed. And he called for a spiritual and a cultural revolution. And of course, we need to do that. And of course, we need to do the inner development work. And of course, we need the outer technology and AI. We need all the solutions. But I hope what you're taking away from this conversation is that in a moment of crisis, we can't outrun our biology. Our behaviors don't rise to the level of our psychology, but they fall to the level and quality of our cellular energy. And so, yes, before we get to the spiritual and cultural revolution, I think we need a health revolution. We need to take care of our health and well-being so we have that strong foundation, and then we can go out and make all the impact that we want to have in the world. So with that, I'm going to ask you to please close your eyes again. Again, just tuning into your body. And I want you to find your 30 trillion cells. Visualize them, whatever comes to mind. And now you know that inside those cells are 14 quadrillion mitochondria, who are in conversation with your 30 trillion bacteria, viruses, fungi that make up your microbiome. And I want you to see if you can tune into that conversation that all of these cells, all of your mitochondria are having right now as they converse with your exposome. I want you to see if you can visualize this conversation, this dynamic, changing, moment-to-moment conversation between your inner and outer ecologies. This is what health is. This conversation between the multi-species ecosystem that is our body and our environment. So if I were to ask you now, where is the boundary of your body? Just notice if your answer has shifted. And now, how do you think of the words health and well-being? I wish you good health. I wish you prosperity. I wish you a lot of happiness. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you so much. You've been a splendid audience. We do have some time for Q&A, and I'd love to be able to take as many questions as I can, so maybe a couple to get us started. Yes, I think there might be microphones.
I'll just speak loudly.
Sure.
First of all, on mitochondria, are you aware that Madeline L'Engle wrote a book called A Swiftly Tilting Planet about illness
Uh,
But that would
I-
be lovely for you, I think.
Thank you. I will look that up. Yes.
Yes. And then my question is, what happened? I read something that stuck with me, that we touch our phones an average of more or less 247 times per day. And what happens to our health and our whole system every time we break down our attention and switch? I hear that when we pretend to multitask, we burn glucose every time we switch. So what is
Yeah.
happening to ourselves when we're addicted to
Yeah.
our physical, electronic, we're so important pieces of plastic?
Perfect. Great question. Thank you. So a lot happens. So there's a lot in that question. But what I will say is, yes, absolutely. When we, how many ever times we touch our phones or any other kind of device, it takes away from the integrity and the capacity of our brain attentional networks. And our brain attentional networks, that's a whole other topic, but fantastic topic. Our brain, so think of your attentional capacity as something finite that you start the day with. So when we get up in the morning, given hopefully we've had a good night's sleep, say you start with a bank of attention in the brain. And everything that you use your attention for, whether it's like what should I decide to wear today, to what should I cook, to where did I keep my keys, to the, a project that you might be working on, to should I check my Instagram, should I check, oh, I got a notification there, and each time you check your device, you are drawing from that bank of attention. So what we find is that when we try to multitask, and you're absolutely right, from a brain's attentional point of view, we cannot multitask. We can only do one thing at a time. So we end up task switching, which, as you also alluded to, is very, very energy intensive. So it's not like that's the only time that the glucose is being used, because we're using glucose constantly to stay alive. But yes, that definitely drains the attentional bank. So what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is use your devices carefully. Absolutely, it's eroding our attention, and attention is the foundation for emotional regulation and social regulation in the brain. So in the brain, very broadly, everything in the brain works with each other. It's not sort of this cartoonish kind of differentiation, but just for understanding it, it helps that your attentional, if you don't have a strong attentional system, no matter how much you try to train your emotional regulation, it's not going to work. It's not going to sustain. And similarly, your any attempts to develop your empathy and compassion will be compromised if your attention is weak. And so there are practices like all the mindfulness practices, the attentional training practices are super, super for building those attentional capacities, in addition to making sure that you curate your media, you curate what you're listening to, and how often you reach for your devices. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, yes?
So there's so many supplements out now with mitochondria. Are there any that actually make a difference?
So, there's one, yes. So the one caution I will always give, like when you actually when somebody tries to sell you a supplement, notice that they're trying to sell you a supplement. So our bodies are really wise, and our bodies have been designed over millennia to be super efficient at what they do. And all they ask of us is to pay attention to just the basic things: what we eat, how much we move, how we sleep, and how we manage our stress. This is 99% of health and longevity. In the latest, I was just at a longevity conference. If you do these things well, spend your time, invest your time in these things. Once you can say, yes, I'm doing everything in this category, then you can have a conversation about some of the newer, sort of more very specific supplements that will make sort of a fractional change. It's kind of like you have to get to be an elite athlete, and then you can try to shave off like 0.001 second of your right? But if you're not there yet, that's not going to make any difference. Having said that, there are some basics, just because our food supply and the way that the stresses that we face in our life are at a point where often it's not enough and we need a little bit of supplementation. So the supplements that usually, and again, this is not medical advice, please, everybody's body is different, check with your healthcare practitioner, but the omega-3s are super important, and people are usually deficient. Vitamin D, most people are deficient. Magnesium, most of us are deficient. So there's some, some basic supplements that are safe to take, but as far as those mitochondrial supplements, the science is not there yet. Yes.
Hi. You mentioned, and I think you're in some ways preaching to the choir, that company performance is reliant on well-being of the employees. But you also alluded to many leaders are short-sighted and they're searching for financial gains, in the short term. What have you seen resonate when you talk about your research to CEOs or leaders of large firms to get them to actually want to take action and do something about this based on research?
Yeah, great question. And it's such a it's a pity that we are in this state, and I really empathize with all of you because I know you are all trying to do that kind of deep work and make those shifts. So I would say please continue to do that deep work. Our organizations really need it. And what I have found, different things work for different people. I think some CEOs and teams come because they've had a healthcare scare themselves. And then suddenly they get it. So that can often be the stimulus. Or they find that the attrition rates and the burnout rates in their teams are getting to a point where it's just, the teams are just like making really, really bad decisions. And then when I can kind of point to the fact that their biology is one factor, it's not the only factor, but it's one factor, then they're more open to it. They like to see the data, so as much data as you can show them in terms of the correlation between financial performance and biology is really key. And now actually all of the podcasting and longevity conversation actually is kind of helpful because more people are talking about health and well-being. So those are some of the things, but I will concede, it is a difficult conversation. Yes? Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah.
How's that?
Yes, that's good.
You began and ended with like an imaginal practice to get us in touch with the 30 trillion. And I've never heard the word quadrillion. That was awesome. Is there any research that relates to that having any kind of effect, like to actually, if our mitochondria are emitting light and there's a connection with imagination and light, is there any research that shows that can have an effect on the mitochondria? Or I'm just fascinated by that. And also, where did they come from? Like, they sound awesome.
Yes, and I just want to make sure I understand your question. So did you say mitochondria emit light?
Like, or create, generating light, or they are, generating energy.
Generate energy, yeah. So it's heat and chemical energy, so not necessarily light per se, but in that Krebs cycle, so when food gets broken down in mitochondria, there's a little bit of heat, and that's the thing that gets wasted, if you will. That's why I was referring to mitochondrial efficiency, because it's not biological processes, there's a lot of waste. So if I remember correctly, it's about 40% of energy that's actually you get in terms of efficiency from the food that you eat. So a lot of it is wasted, but then, and then the other is chemical energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is this chemical molecule that is used to power all the reactions. So remind me of your question again.
So, is there any research that shows, if you like, imagining them or connecting with them through the imagination can have an effect on the mitochondria?
Not that I'm aware of. And maybe those studies, I don't know if they've been done. But I think where a visualization practice helps is is it just gives you that, it starts to move you towards that deep rest that I was talking about. It gives you a moment to just reflect and sort of breathe. So if you can combine visualization with some kind of breathing practice, the goal is to switch from a sympathetic state of biology to a parasympathetic, the rest and digest state. So any practice that does that will be helpful. And I remember your other question, which was where did these guys come from? Literally, it's a story I would encourage all of you to read about, the origin story of mitochondria, because it's literally the origin of life. So way back in the day, 1.5 billion years ago, the first forms of cellular life were just like unicellular. So they were called archaea, and they were called bacteria. So there was a kind of archaean, and there was a kind of bacterium. And as fate would have it, there was a divine encounter. And there was a reason for the divine encounter where the archaean engulfed the bacterium into its body. And it's thought that it was because this bacterium had developed the capacity to use oxygen, which was newly found in the Earth's atmosphere back then, because previous to that there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. So these bacteria had developed the capacity to use oxygen to produce energy, and this is something that this archaean did not have the capacity for. And for life to propagate, when I was talking about protein expression and gene expression, that's a very, very energy intensive process. So if the archaean could co-opt the bacterium's capacity for increased energy, it meant that the archaean could then live longer because it would increase its capacity to produce different kinds of protein. So this is what happened. We don't know how that happened, but we're glad it did, because then that engulfed bacterium became the beginning. So that was now multicellular life. So we went from unicellular to multicellular life. And then as that propagated, that became plants, animals, and then humans. So all cells of all plants, animals, and humans have these mitochondria. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. Yeah.